I'm General Tom James. I'm the Armor Commandant, 46 Armor Commandant of the United States Army, and I'm here representing the United States Armor School and the Maneuver Center of Excellence as well.
Great to have you here, General. Just to ask, I understand the US fleet currently, you're weighted 40% towards armor now and 60% cavalry, so there's a shift there and it's significant, but what does it mean for you?
Well, primarily, how did we get there? First off, back in the day before we had modularity, where we had armored infantry brigade combat teams and striker brigade combat teams, our armor force was primarily in the armored brigades. But when we went to modularity and we have reconnaissance formations in all three of those brigade combat teams, our armored reconnaissance cavalrymen now go to all three of those brigades. So a two-thirds expansion of our cavalry force when we did that. So that created a balance. We were 60 tank, 40 cavalry. It just reversed it because there's just more requirement for cavalry in those formations that don't have tanks.
Excellent. Just moving on to recent theatre operations. In terms of the insurgency we're facing, I understand that the new threat seems to be a rise in anti-tank guided missiles, the use even of robotics and unmanned aerial vehicles as well. Did we plan for this? Did you plan for this? Is it something that is seriously degrading operations, or is it a threat that you've managed to adapt to?
I think it's a threat that we've managed to adapt to. And what we're looking at is what does the future operating environment and threat look like out 2020 and beyond? And what we're looking at is high technologies like anti-tank guided missiles pushed down to the lowest level, to a hybrid threat of irregular forces and potentially in the hands of criminal gangs and these kind of folks that have common objectives. And so we know that the ATGM, the anti-tank guided missile, the improvised explosive device, UAS's unmanned aerial systems will now be available at the lowest level in these particular threats. So we have to be able to counter those in the future. And we're working through that. I think our systems for the most part now allow us to do that. We got to look at our tactics and how we combined armor and infantry to be able to get through what I like to refer to as the red zone. That's that last 5,000 meters of the objective area where those ATGMs and the IEDs can disrupt operations. And we got to have armored protection to get through that. And we've learned some of that from the Israelis in 2006 and 2008 in their conflicts where those ATGMs were applied against their forces and they had to leverage armor to get through there.
So a lot has been discussed already at this event. One of the key topics that seems to keep cropping up is the use of the main battle tank in regards to coin operations. Is it still relevant?
Right, it is still relevant. We still have to achieve overmatch at the point of the spear and at contact, and the tank can do that. It can support infantry. Infantry can support tanks depending on the situation. But it's the application of heavy armor that's so important. There can be a psychological advantage in a coin or stability type operation, and there can also be a psychological disadvantage. So we got to understand the right balance. What is the threat? Does the population need our heavy armor protection? And sometimes it can really intimidate the threat and get the threat out of a particular area. So we need to respond with armor, but there's a point in time where you have diminishing returns and you probably need to pull the tanks out and then use your wheeled vehicles and your dismounted activity to really build those relationships. You don't want to deter relationships by having too much armor tearing up a neighborhood if the situation is stabilized.
Excellent. Now you're very much involved in the upgrade and maintenance of the existing fleet before the future programs take full effect. Could you just briefly walk us through the Tank Urban Survival Kit?
Yeah, the Tank Urban Survival Kit is a great example of us being able to adapt while in contact with the enemy. In the 10 years in Iraq, we identified some things that we needed to work on. One was protection for the tank commander, because whenever he fired his 50 cal or was required to do so, he had to expose himself. And so we put him under armor, and we have a remote control firing system in this Tank Urban Survival Kit. We also gave thermal sights to our loaders and protection to our loaders, reactive armor. We had slat armor for the rear of the tank just based on RPGs and these tank-guided missile threats. And as well, we have a phone that we're wired into the tank off of the side rear to allow infantry that are dismounted to communicate with the vehicle commander to help apply fires or to moving protection for our infantry formations. One thing I'd like to add, too, that has been fascinating this week is how similar our view of the future is among all these countries that are represented here today. We have similar threats. We think they're going to be hybrid. They think they're going to be mixed with the population, technical weapon systems pushed down to the lowest level. We've wrestling through some of the same issues with resource constraints, force reductions, design structure changes, and how can we leverage technology for training. And so it's been really invaluable to see some of the similarities and share some of the ideas.
Does that mean we are looking at a future in which we'll see more joint operations, multilateral partnerships when it comes to both the design and the deployment of armoured vehicles in the future?
I think that the multinational aspect we've just learned in Iraq and Afghanistan is going to be a part of the future fight. It is. That's an environment, we call it JIM, Joint Interagency, Intergovernmental and Multinational Organizations working together. And we have to make sure that our brigade formations have headquarters that are large enough and capable enough to plug in and work with those kinds of folks and that are really going to help shape the future fight.
Fantastic. I'll also give you an opportunity to just brief us very quickly on Operation Blackjack.
Yeah, Operation Blackjack was just an example I used of a blended training scenario where it's the last event for our Army reconnaissance course. It's a 3-week course where we develop lieutenant level and sergeant level leaders for our reconnaissance formations that we talked about at the beginning. And Blackjack, we initially start out with about 36 hours dismounted, then we transition to mounted, and then a combination of mounted and dismounted, and then we go into a gaming system where we go into security operation and use virtual battlefield simulation, VBS2, to create a scenario that we couldn't replicate otherwise on the ground just based on the number of resources required. Soldiers are still in kit. They just come right off their vehicle and go into a position as if they were in the wood line, but they're actually in front of a terminal. And they continue to report on the same tactical net. And it's a great way for us to increase the intensity of an exercise. And it's their capstone event. As soon as they finish that VBS2 piece, they graduate from ARC, our Army Reconnaissance Course. I think there needs to be a balance between live. I mean, when it's really a human endeavor. There's a very strong human dimension to what we do for a living, and so we have to do the human-to-human contact, the live interaction. But we can leverage simulation to get the best bang for the buck with the live by just working simulations and working a gated strategy to where we can simulate activities. I think simulation gives us a couple things. One is it allows us to replicate a very complex environment with reduced resources that we won't necessarily have available in the future. So we can really upgun the environment by using simulations. And then based on that, we can use those tools to really develop leaders through repetition. We can pick a particular event, and then we can do it multiple times, and we can change it in varying conditions. And that's what helps our critical thinking for our junior leaders, so that as they build this mental database, that they can react in combat more effectively. And so that's how we can leverage simulation, by creating the environment that's so complex it's hard to do live, and then by the repetition and varying conditions, I think is very important as well. We're looking at a strategy in the United States Army that says you have to have certain gates you have to do in simulation before you go live. A good example is tank gunnery. You have to go through our conduct of fire simulations training with the tank commander and the gunner, and they have to get to a certain matrix level with their reticle aim and ability to shoot before they can go forward and shoot live ammunition, so that you're not wasting that ammunition. They're that much better before they start shooting live. And then we're looking at ways potentially that we may replace some of the live to create offsets and savings to allow us to do other things in the future, but not completely, just maybe not as often per year, as an example.
But working out that ratio is obviously hugely difficult between live training, instruction, simulation. Surely are you finding that you're needing to push back because the potential cost savings for simulation are obviously going to be the bigger attraction for those in the decision-making process?
I think we're okay right now. One of the things we do have to consider is the experience of the crew. Now, if the crew's been together for a long time and they've qualified before, then we can leverage, maybe replace some of their live with simulation just as a validation or a refresher. But if it's a new crew, then we really got to use simulation and then do all of the live hits until they're to a certain level. So that's an example of a way that we can potentially leverage that if we had to replace some of the live. I've had 3 rotations. I was a battalion commander and brigade commander in Iraq, 2 different rotations. And I can tell you that you can't divorce the human aspect and the relationship building in an environment like that from the warfighting. It's too closely linked. I have seen where relationships that a junior leader at the platoon level has made with his Iraqi counterpart in the Iraqi military or an Iraqi civic leader that has diffused a situation that could have gone south based on some action or activity that occurred just because they've worked that interaction. You know, there is a universal language out there. If you treat each other with dignity and respect, and you can build that trust, and then you got to feed that trust. It doesn't just happen and then it's done. You got to continue to do maintenance to those relationships. They can prove invaluable because ultimately it's winning the population over will prevent the insurgents or the extremists from being able to hide within that population. You get the intelligence you need to be able to execute direct action to take care of the threats and help provide a stable environment for the population and civic capacity to grow.
Fantastic. Just on a last note, speaking of building relationships, has this event been useful to you and has it met your expectations in terms of networking with the international community? I know you mentioned earlier that has been a part of it, but in your own words, I suppose, what has it done for you to be here?
It's been a great experience for us. We're all focused on the profession of arms and different perspectives, different countries, different ideas, but there's a common bond here about our soldiering and about protecting our soldiers on the battlefield and giving them the proper kit and equipment to be able to survive. You know, I think back to the MRAP. I have soldiers that are at home hugging their family today because we reacted as a nation and created the MRAP to allow us, while in contact with the enemy, to get the armor and protection required to our soldiers, and the results were magnificent. So those kind of things and sharing with each other the technologies that can better make our force mobile, survivable, and lethal, I think is very important to what we do. And this whole week has allowed us to do this. A full breadth of discussions and briefings ranging from network to armor to tactics, and seeing the displays and some of the different armoring capabilities. I think that was invaluable to us. It really was.